feel like I came out of the valley, came out of the slums, God brought me out of it. But just because you're out of a hard season doesn't mean that you are in this perfect new season. You are still always waiting for something, whether we're waiting for the weekend to come around, or, for me, the next concert that I'm going to go to, or some of us that are waiting for those miracles, like the pregnancy that you've been praying for years, or even somebody coming to Christ. And what I've noticed in the last couple of years, and what I feel is really vital, is we don't wait our lives away. I know I've heard that term, like we shouldn't wish our lives away, because we're always like, oh, I wish it was Friday. But then we're just wasting a bunch of days that God gave us. And so waiting is inevitable, but it is how we wait that makes all the difference. We need to find purpose in the waiting and ask God what He is trying to teach us in this season right now. So as I mentioned, I feel like I've been in a little bit of a waiting season of life, especially for the last few years. And my whole life, I feel like I've been a little bit in this waiting season. And I was kind of waiting for God to feel real. If you don't know me, I have not talked to a lot of you. So I grew up in a Christian home. So I've been in the church my entire life. And I think there's something about growing up in a Christian home where you kind of wait as an adult. You're like, I know this is what I believe, that I know wholeheartedly, but I don't know why. You didn't have that like amazing, moment where like everything just seemed real. And so I was kind of waiting for that. It always felt like I came here, I was checking the boxes, and I just wasn't feeling that deep relationship with Christ. I followed the rules and did what I was supposed to do because that's what I was supposed to do, not because that was my faith telling me that was what I wanted to do, if that makes sense. When I was 9, my parents divorced, and as the years went on, I've noticed, of course, a lot of traumas as an adult that you realize stem from your childhood. And flash forward to 3 years ago, I found myself going through a divorce as well. And that was after 8 years of marriage, and just my life felt really flipped upside down. As a kid and growing up, and when I got married, I was 20 when I got married, and I promised myself, I was like, I'm not gonna do the same thing that my parents did. Divorce is not an option, that's not gonna happen with us. Yet, there I was, after 8 years, filing for divorce on what would have been our 8-year wedding anniversary, which happens to be 3 years from Saturday, which is why I specifically chose this date, because May 17th is the day that we filed and also the day we got married. And I thought, why not stand in front of you guys talking about my story almost to the day that kind of it all went down. And for me, I know a lot of people will stand up here and tell you about how their marriage was saved, and that was not my reality in that. The January leading up to our separation, so I think that was January of 2022, I tried to choose a word each year, and that year my word for the year was going to be surrender. It was something my counselor and I had talked about, and I was like, I feel like my word of the year is surrender. And I wrote that down, and then I just prayed over it, and I didn't quite know what that looked like. At the time, I knew that I was living in sin to a degree, and I knew that I wasn't happy in my marriage. I knew that there were problems, but I didn't quite know what that word surrender meant. And I think what I realized over time, and as I was writing my journal one night, God really spoke to me, and I felt like, whether we stay together, He's there. Whether we don't stay together, He's there. And I think when I somewhat was able to grasp that and hold on to that moment, I think that's what surrender looked like for me. It was the willingness to let God work in my life, whatever that looked like. I was thinking it was going to be like a physical act, but it was more of just an act of the heart that I felt like. And those next few months leading up to our divorce were very brutal. After one night, I remember being here at SOS, and something in that message, I don't even remember what the message was, but something in it really convicted me. And I remember Colleen and I were sitting at this back table, the table that does not exist anymore. But we were sitting at the back table, it was just the two of us, and I just remember sitting there and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't think I love my husband anymore. And I just was like devastated. And I realized I couldn't keep going on with how I had been living. And I got in the car and I called him and I was crying and I was like, I need to talk to you. And I got home and I shared that with him. He and I had a lot of things going on that kind of led to that moment, but I had to sit there and admit to him that, first of all, I didn't think I was still in love with him, and secondly, I did have feelings for somebody else. And I have listened to Debbie talk so much about how easy it is to fall into an emotional affair, and I think your brain is like, oh, it's fine, like nothing's happening, we're talking. But when you're talking about your marriage with that other person, when they are saying things that are really inappropriate to somebody who is married, and it just crosses a line. And I had to confess to my husband at the time that I was having those feelings. I didn't know that I wanted to really work on it, not just because of those feelings I was having, but just from all of the other things that had happened at that point. And I then kind of started that process, and in talking with Taylor, confessed to some of my close friends and family, and I was so good at hiding what was going on and so good at checking all of the boxes that when I started confessing that to my friends and my family, like we were already almost to the point of filing for a divorce. My sister didn't actually know I moved out of my house until I had already moved out, and I called her and I was like, hey, by the way, I'm getting a divorce, so that's super fun, because I was so embarrassed, and so I just felt like the lowest of low, and I think I can't quite describe it, and I know that my counselor talked with me and she's like, it seems like you just figured out that you're a sinner. And to a degree I kind of had, because I was so good at following the rules that then it came around to me realizing this is bad, that it just debilitated me. But it also, even right immediately, like before we went through that divorce and I realized all of this, it also brought me closer to God in that sense of like, oh, this is why Jesus had to die. Like, this is why we have a Savior, because we need saving. It's not just for fun and emotional support. It is because we are not able to be who Jesus was, and we aren't able to be perfect. And so I think just kind of all of that brought me to that moment. So brings me to tonight. That was 3 years ago, and now I feel like I'm very much in a season of waiting to know what comes next. I've processed, I've grieved all that is the divorce, and had to kind of wrestle with that fact of feeling not worthy enough and having to admit that I went through divorce at 28, and it was never in the plans, of course. So it brings me here tonight, and it led me to wanting to speak on finding purpose in the waiting, whether you've gone through something really traumatic or maybe your life just feels a little bit stagnant. I think God can really speak through you in this season and do a lot of good change. So, sorry, I have been fighting a sore throat all week as well. So bear with me, but God highlighted 2 verses for me time and time again, but especially in these last couple of years. The first verse is Psalm 27:14. It says, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. The second one that came up just in this last year, I was doing a study on this book, and this is Habakkuk 2:3. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. When we're in a season of waiting, the enemy is gonna also try to tell you lies about your situation. And I am very good at listening to the lies, And so I wanted to share some common lies that I felt over the last handful of years and honestly throughout all of my life, and then replace them for you with God's truth in those lies. So the first lie that I think we all feel, no matter if we are married, single, have a million children, lots of pets, I think we all feel this one. That lie is that you are alone. The enemy is going to convince you that while you are in this season of waiting, you are the only person in the entire world to feel the way you do. He will convince you that no one can truly understand what you're going through. It's isolating, and that's just what the enemy intends. When we are alone, it's so easy for the enemy to ensnare us and convince us that we will always be alone. But the truth is, thankfully for us, that God is always with us. So I live alone. I have a dog. She's my princess. She's 4 years old, golden doodle. So I remember there are just some nights where I'm feeling obviously very lonely, being in an apartment by myself. And I remember just sitting there, and I think I was crying, and I was doing my journaling, and I was like, God, I am so tired of being alone. I'm just every day coming home by myself, and as much as it's great to have, a dog, sometimes it feels alone, and that nobody's there, nobody's listening. And in that moment, Mila had actually jumped from the floor onto the bed, and she just curled up next to me while I was journaling. And I think that it was just God recognizing that I needed like a physical touch in that moment. And I remember when she did that, I was just like, okay, I see you, I hear you, you hear me. And I think that was just so big and impactful for me, to show that God really does work in so many different ways, and often in ways that we don't even recognize or don't even realize. And so I want you to kind of take a moment right now and think about either a person or maybe a pet, or maybe it's your walks in nature, whatever it is. Think about a situation where God speaks to you or shows you love, and it's not in your standard typical, I'm sitting, reading my Bible, and praying. So think about whatever that is, and then I encourage you to write it down so that you can come back to it. And every time you're feeling alone, you're able to acknowledge that, nope, God is here. He is in this person, He is in this pet, He is in this hobby that I love to do. I personally, aside from just my dog, I have one friend who was my absolute rock through the divorce, and still is. I call her my emotional support person. We happen to work together, so it works out because I get to see her all of the time. But there were nights where I would call her and I was uncontrollably sobbing. And all I would do is I would call her on the phone and I would sit there crying. She's like, what's going on? And I would tell her, and she probably couldn't even understand half of what I was saying. But she was used so deeply in that season by God. And every time she would just come back to speaking truth to me and making sure that I didn't just stay stagnant in that specific moment. And I don't think she understands. I tell her all the time how much I love her, but I don't think she understands like how much of a support she is. And it's just been so fun kind of seeing that relationship grow and acknowledging God in her and in that moment. So whether or not we hear Him speaking to us, God is always with us, never leaves us, and we just need to be open to seeing Him work in ways that we wouldn't expect. And when you do that, you'll start noticing Him everywhere. And then the verse I have that goes with this is Joshua 1:5. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. How amazing is that the same God who was with Moses is always also with us here. That same God that we read in the Old Testament that did all of these like wondrous things chose you. I think that's something that we don't sit in as often. I know I don't. I know that I need to just sit in that presence and be like, no, God chose me and He chose you. And I think we just kind of pass that off. The next lie I wanted to go over is that this season will last forever. Through these last few years following the divorce, the enemy is constantly telling me that the season of aloneness is not going to end. And that brings on worry that I won't find my person, or that I'll find them too late to be able to have a biological family, which is something that I strongly desire. And the enemy wants you to stay stagnant and accept those lies that you can't change, that it will be the same. If we do this, we get to live in that victim mentality. We stay that way for the rest of our lives. And I've seen that happen with people. And that was something that I, really tried to avoid and just keep acknowledging, and still to this day trying to keep acknowledging that someday, if it's God's will, that my person will come and I'll have that family. But it's easy to get trapped in that fear. The truth to that, though, is that seasons always change. We are a very strong season-oriented county, I feel like. We have some good seasons here. And as you notice, winter does not stay winter forever, and spring will not stay spring forever. It does always keep moving, and I think a really important thing is to remember that seasons last longer than others sometimes for you. Some seasons will last longer than others. I know that Debbie has talked about praying over a loved one to find salvation, and it wasn't just days that she was praying. It wasn't weeks, it wasn't months, it was years and years and years. Like literally probably the same amount of time that some of us have been here on this earth. Like she was praying diligently and has seen growth from that. There are other times where our prayers might be answered in just a few days or just a few weeks. But God keeps us in those seasons, I believe, for growth to happen. Whether we want to believe it or not, He truly does work for the good of those who love Him. And sometimes these very difficult seasons of waiting change us in ways we would have never been able to had they not happened. I never expected to experience the peace that I have now. I'm still full of anxiety in a sense, but the peace that I have in my relationship with God and the peace of being on my own, I know that I said, yes, I do get lonely sometimes, not perfect, but overall this sense of peace I just didn't expect would ever come. And it came from a time of very deep depression and really questioning kind of everything that was happening. And so I encourage you to really lean into the hard feelings. Whether you're feeling something hard right now or in the future, because unfortunately we will suffer eventually again, really lean into those hard feelings right now and try to find ways to seek God until the season changes, and then continue to trust Him in the next. Verse I wanted to share with this truth is Ecclesiastes 3:1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. I would encourage you to go read that specific passage, like the whole, I think it's like 1 through 8. I think it was actually something, I think Sarah shared it in a live during COVID, and where everything was questioning, but I love that passage, so I really encourage you to go look that up. The next lie I wanted to talk about is that you are not enough. And I think especially for us women, that's probably one of the favorite things that the enemy tries to drill into us, and I think we just believe it all of the time. And I think that so many of us just believe this lie of, I will never be enough for blank, or I will never be enough to be able to do this thing. And the blank might be your husband, or your friend, or your mom, or boss. I think this is one of the ones I probably struggle with the most. I'm very much a people pleaser. I do not like conflict, and I want everybody to be happy with me all of the time. So when somebody's not happy with me, whether it's because they did something wrong or not, I'm convinced that it was my fault. Like, absolutely, I probably did something wrong. I'm going to apologize for something that I did not do, because I just tend to get so wrapped up in that. And it happened this week. I had one of my rental owners just completely yell at me and name calling, very rude conversation, but I had the same thing. And last night I was crying at home, and I was falling into that lie that, I'm not enough, that what he was saying was true. And so I think, just really hone in on when you have those words of doubt, because the truth is that there's actually a little bit of truth in that statement. We aren't enough, at least not on our own. The truth is that you are more than enough through Christ. As I mentioned earlier, if we were all perfect and never made mistakes, we would have no need for a Savior. And when I admitted to just how badly I was living in sin, whether it was, sin that was on a billboard or sin that I was hiding inside of me, it really changed my heart when I humbled myself enough for me to come to that place of surrender and say, okay, God, do what only you can do. If it saved my marriage, great, cool. If not, great. And I was terrified saying those things, but I knew that deep down, God would win in the end. As much as we have that humble heart coming to him, I truly believe that he will work good into every situation. And of course, the verse that goes with this truth is Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The next lie that I wanted to share was no good can come from this. I think that any of us, and I know there's so many traumatic stories sitting in this room, and I think we can all admit that God really does bring beauty out of everything. But in the moment, the enemy really plays into your pain and tells you that this pain will be for nothing. It won't bring any sort of good to your life. And I obviously wrestled with this one as well, but God does bring beauty from our suffering. So that would be my truth, is that God brings beauty from our suffering. There were a lot of verses that would stand out to me. There's a lot. If you just search suffering in the Bible, there's so many verses that have to do with suffering, and so many that I clung to. So a couple of the ones I wanted to share was the first one, James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I love the ending of that verse, not lacking anything. I think that is something that we all strive for, right? We want everything. And with God and through that perseverance, through those trials, that's where we're going to find that fullness and completion with God. Excuse me. The next verse I wanted to share with that truth is Psalm 119:50. My comfort in my suffering is this: your promise preserves my life. After going through the last few years and feeling that heartbreak, I can admit that there was never a time, and has never been a time in the last few years, that I sat there and I'm like, I should have just not said anything. I should have stayed living in the sin. I should not have gone through this heartbreak because it didn't do anything. I would not change literally anything. And yes, there are things I wish, in a sense, that didn't have to happen to get me here, but they did. And I wouldn't change anything because I wouldn't want to change how God has changed my heart in these years. Even changing one little thing could put me in a totally different place. I wouldn't be standing up here right now sharing this story. I wouldn't have had the guts to do it. And so I think that was something after the divorce, and having watched my parents go through divorce and see how they were affected by their own divorce, after that was happening and during it, I was like, I'm going to find good. I'm going to change. I'm going to make sure that whatever I was going through, it was worth it. And basically, I just kept coming here. I kept pursuing God, and just stayed stubborn into that. I wasn't going to put half effort into that. I wasn't going to be like, oh, maybe I'll do a little bit this day. Like, I was going to be certain and just trust that God would heal me through that heartbreak. Okay, I also wanted to go ahead and share some tangible things because I always find that really helpful. with just like day-to-day applications. And so the first real life application I wanted to share was choose gratitude. Since the beginning of the year, I have ended each day by journaling things I'm grateful for in that day. And some days it's very specific to something that happened in that day. Sometimes it might be generic, like I'm thankful for Neela. She comes up in my grateful list a lot. Or walks, whatever it is. I just started to write down everything. And I will say, even some days this week, there are days where I feel like nothing was good about that day, that I am wiped out and I'm emotionally exhausted and I don't want to talk about good things, but I've just made myself sit down and end the night with that list of gratitude, and I just have that, like, things that I'm grateful for, and then I write it down. And there's a lot of things that come up in that, but as I've started doing that, I feel like I'm finding myself thanking God more and more throughout the day as well. And so I think that's definitely a very helpful thing. I also wanted to share that there was one moment in this where, I was praying for peace at work and feeling peace and contentment with work, with my situation. And I felt God's prompting, and I don't hear necessarily like that physical voice of God. I know we all kind of share and sometimes have that differences, but I just felt that prompting, that nudge from God being like, it's not a feeling, it's a choice. And so I think that is something that I really want to point out, is that we're choosing gratitude. It's not that we're feeling gratitude, we're not feeling thankful, it's that we're choosing it. And I think in choosing it and really centering ourselves with the good, then that's when we start to feel it deep down. So it's a choice, not a feeling. The next application I wanted to put, real life application, is to stay active. As I mentioned like 17 times throughout this one, I have a dog. And so I walked a lot during that time after our divorce. Previously, I lived in a house out in Blaine, and so when she was younger and a puppy, we had a fenced backyard. When her and I moved into town, we moved into a studio apartment. We have a little patio, but it's not anywhere a dog can get exercise. So I had to really focus on getting out and about, even on those days where all I wanted to do was sit on the couch and just eat ice cream, watch a sad movie, and mope. But then she would be there and she'd be like, "No, Mom, we gotta go for a walk." So now I do make a point, I work out before I go to work to help kind of start that day off a little bit better. And then usually in the evening after work, that's when Neela and I will do our walks. And I just think even moving a little bit just helps clear your head. I know for me, I process a lot better when I'm walking and listening to music, or you can have worship playing, you can have podcasts, whatever it is that you need to kind of unwind. I think that's just really helpful. And then I know that it also helps you sleep better. More sleep is also better for you mentally, as we all know as well. And I think it's really important to not compare yourself with others when it comes to moving your body. We're all in a different season of life, and so if you like walking, walk. If you like riding your bike, ride your bike. If you like running, how? Why do you like running? I'm just kidding. Bless you who run. I wish I could do that for sure, but all just aside, just move your body. I think it's so helpful, and even 5 minutes of movement is better than no minutes of movement. So be kind with yourself. Everybody starts somewhere, and we're all on different journeys. The next one is to seek wise counsel. As I mentioned earlier, my friends helped me tremendously through the season. And I do think, though, it's very important that we seek wise counsel, because not everybody who is there to support us is necessarily going to point us in the direction of Jesus. So really try to differentiate that. I know that was something that my dad really spoke to me a lot about right after the separation, of making sure I was surrounding myself with people who would keep, pushing me to Christ, and not just kind of sit there and try to, ex-husband bash. So really just focus on it, who is trustworthy, and who's gonna support you in a godly way. And then if you do have the capability, I would really encourage you to find a counselor, a Christian counselor preferably. Mine is a counselor who happens to be a Christian, which ended up being a really great surprise. But that way, when her and I are talking, she also points me in the direction of Christ, but then also takes some of the burden off of my friends, because I have a safe space that I can just word vomit all over her, basically. The next one is to feel your feelings and acknowledge your desires. I am a firm believer that you need to feel your feelings and acknowledge all of the emotions that you're feeling. I was very angry after the divorce. There were just days where I was very upset that my story didn't look different. And I just kind of leaned into it because, God knows what you're thinking all the time. So there's not really any point in trying to hide it. You may as well just admit and be like, yeah, God, I'm really frustrated over this situation, but I'm going to trust you with it, but I am very upset. And I love going back to that verse, the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35. It says Jesus wept. And if you know that story, you know that he wept because his friends were weeping, basically. They were mourning the death of somebody, and he wasn't weeping because that person died, because he was gonna, raise them. He was weeping because his children and his friends were hurting. And I think that's something also to focus in on. Like, when you're feeling those things, know that God is angry with you. And a lot of times he's angry for the things that we have to go through. But again, going back to what we talked about, he brings beauty from it. And then my counselor also had shared something with me, which I think is really helpful, is that just because you feel something doesn't make it true. Mm-hmm. So as much as it's very good to acknowledge your feelings, and I think it's very healthy to acknowledge them, don't let your feelings dictate your life. And know that sometimes you're gonna feel things, but it doesn't mean they're true, right? Like, we feel like we aren't enough, but that's not true. So really, I had it down on a sticky note. But just because you feel something doesn't make it true. And then also on the tail end of that, acknowledge your desires too, because, if it's in alignment with God, I think it's so fun to dream with him as well of like what all could happen. So just acknowledge those desires and give him that opportunity to answer those prayers. The last real life application that I wanted to share, which is something I stole from Debbie, to coach your soul. And I had to throw this in there because it's so true. And I think it's just vital to speak life to yourself and talk nicely to yourself. And I know it's very easy for us to not do that. But imagine if you said the things that you said to yourself to your friend. I think a lot of us would probably have way less friends than we have right now, just because we're so mean to ourselves. So really focus in on that. If you catch yourself being like, I'm so dumb, be like, oh, that's the enemy. That's not true. Maybe you just had a moment, which is fine, but just be kind to yourself and allow grace for yourself. I think that's something that has been big through this whole journey, is that I remember sitting in church and they talk about loving your neighbor as yourself. And I'd sit there and be like, well, what do you do if you don't love yourself? How do you love your neighbor if you don't love who you are? And so I think us being able to love others well starts with us loving ourselves well. And not in a selfish, cocky way, just, love yourself well, knowing that you are a creation of God. So, wrapping all of this up, at the start of my testimony, I mentioned I was yearning for God to feel real to me. And that was something that I was desiring for basically, the 28, 29 years of my life up until these last couple years. But I can tell you that through all of this, through everything that God brought me with the divorce, all of those trials, I found that feeling of realness, I don't know how else to say that, with God. He feels real to me. It doesn't feel like I'm faking it anymore and coming to him just being like, okay, I know you're here, I know that, but knowing it in our soul. And I can tell you, through all of that struggle, he does feel real. And yes, I still feel like I'm definitely in that waiting trial of like, okay, what's next? We've done so much healing, let's move on. But I know that in the process, my purpose here in this waiting is that I'm supposed to encourage others who are going through something. I've felt it from him the last several months, and I think that's why he called me up here. And so, yeah, I hope that you found this encouraging. I hope that you are thinking about what you are waiting for, and I hope you lean into finding purpose in that waiting and ask God what he has for you while you're waiting for that.